Hello, everybody. Let's back to the second PowerPoint on Judaism, and this we've just covered the history and literature, and now looking at the basic belief system. And so, I did again want to say that it's very easy for some of us, I think for me, to turn this into a um, Christian understanding. So I've tried very hard to make this um, as much from the Jewish perspective as possible. But I did want to start then. All the pictures I use in this PowerPoint are from Marc Chagall, who was a Russian Jew who fled to France and very much incorporated his Jewish faith um, into his art, and so it's very lovely. So the question then, as we talk about the belief system of Judaism, and here's another quote from Houston Smith. How did a relative latecomer in the history of religion? So we think of Judaism as ancient, but when you really start with the Hindu, not so much. Relatively insignificant place that few numbers create the basic framework for understanding of Western civilization. And so this is really why Judaism is so influential, the answer to this question. And so I wanted to talk about the pillars of Judaism. We'll talk very clearly about the pillars of Islam. And there really is no such thing, except I'm sort of trying to be parallel. There are certain basic elements of, of Judaism as it's practiced that equate in some ways to just the fundamental basis of these. So here they are: ethical monotheism, Torah, mitzvot, covenant and election, and the idea of Israel. So ethical monotheism. So again, we've talked a lot about as Judaism develops in the biblical period, they really are basically polytheists, then henotheists, and then monotheists. But it is very much central to the Jewish tradition, the total, absolute, uncompromising oneness of God. This God is both the creator, so there is unlike a lot of the religions that surrounded it, the Greco-Roman religions, for example, the emphasis on this God as loving creator. This God is personal, which then and picks the people. We'll talk about covenant and election, but relates in a very personal way, and we can use metaphors of kinship to talk about the Jewish God. You know, father, husband. Most of them in the Bible are, of course, male-centered. Mother is occasionally used as well. So this idea of the personal nature of God. But the ethical part then comes in this highly, highly moral nature of God. And this really is so striking when you study the ancient religions that surrounded the Hebrew people, that this central concern of the care and proper care of others is so much a part of Judaism, and what sets it apart from the religions from which it grew. So it's very tempting to go to Bible quotes, but I did then want to, in regard to this, I believe that the Creator, blessed be His name, is one, and that no unity is like His in any form, and that He alone is our God, who was, is, and ever will be. So Maimonides is a part of the great golden age of Jewish intellectual thought from Spain. But of course, also it is. I skipped over the idea that God is not incarnate in any way. So this is, it very clearly, as Judaism develops alongside Christianity, rejects the idea of an incarnation in any way. But so this uncompromising understanding of monotheism, which would even disagree with Christian understanding of monotheism, and the very moral nature. So this, by the way, the Adon Olam, is a part of the Jewish liturgy, daily and Shabbat liturgy, that has been in place and used since the 15th century. So this is very central to the traditional liturgy of the Jewish tradition. So you can read over that, and I would, encourage you to read it slowly and pay attention. But also, many of you are aware that the Hebrew name for God in the Bible is Yahweh, and it is not said out loud in any Jewish tradition. That's why in our biblical texts it's usually printed as Lord in all caps. Well, Judaism in general has a just an aversion to writing out the name of God in any form. So I just wanted to explain that this GD is a way to, so it's a placeholder in the Jewish liturgy and literature. So you'll find in more devout Jewish traditions that they don't spell out God. They do this, and again, it's a matter of very much along the lines of it's too holy. God is so holy that we don't really even write out the name of God. So go ahead and read that. Again, it's a part of the liturgy. So ethical monotheism. And then we have the idea of Torah. So again, we've talked maybe in other classes about the idea of a revealed religion, as opposed to a more natural-based religions like Shintoism that understands that nature, or the Asian traditions, so that are a mixture. But the idea that God has revealed to the people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, knowledge that they would not have known otherwise, except the personal God that they worship chose to come to them and reveal that to them. So again, the idea of relationship is also a part of that. So this idea then of Torah literally means instruction. So, it's law, but with the connotation of instruction. And it is confusing because the term does refer to the first 5 books of the Bible, but really Torah in a larger sense, it applies to all of the texts of Judaism. So basically, that would be the Tanakh and the Talmud, with other things sort of coming in second place. But all of this sacred. So in some ways, they will refer to the Torah as the instruction, and they mean all of this, not just the first 5 books of the Bible. So it is a little confusing for those of us on the outside. But this is then this revealed information, this written tradition is understood as given by God as guidance. And so it is, or as instruction. And so the very focus of the Jewish people in Scripture. So again, we've done a lot of stuff with the Old Testament, so you have some background with that in some other classes. Now, it's not just Torah. Torah is the larger context, but it is what they extract from Torah. So a mitzvot is the plural. So mitzvah literally means commandment. And in the Jewish tradition, again, these are for those that follow the laws more strictly. But anyways, let me go back. So Jewish scholars and religious leaders have identified 613 commandments overall in the biblical text, in the Torah. That's an important number. But because the modern Judaism is born out of Pharisaic Judaism that thought very clearly about the idea of application of the laws into each new generation, then there are really only about 200 that apply today. But that would only be for Orthodox and conservative, we talked about, Jews who in some way would follow these 200 commandments as best they could. Now you get to Reform, Reconstructionists, obviously we're moving away from that. And so in general, if you are a Reform Jew, you wouldn't be focusing on these actual 200 commandments, but you would, mitzvah has also then, or mitzvot is the plural, the idea of good deeds. And that takes us back then to the ethical understanding. This is ethical monotheism, so these good deeds for a Reform Jew it's not following a bunch of laws, but there is and commandments, but very much an emphasis on practicing a certain kind of moral and ethical judgment as you walk through this world. So the idea of doing mitzvot is very, very important, even for those Jews who don't actually pay attention to the individual laws. So again, the idea of mitzvot, the overarching principle, right? So it has been a sort of, I think, a bad use of Paul in the Christian tradition to talk about how the law is bad, and, you know, if your ox falls into the ditch and it's a Sunday, do you let your ox die rather than pulling it out of the ditch? Those kinds of things and accusations have been flung at Judaism for a very long time by Christians. And so really the overarching principle of all life, or of all the commandments, is that it bends to the principle of the preservation of life, right? So perhaps in the simplest sense, it is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. You're supposed to be fasting for 24 hours. But that fast is not, if you then apply the principle of preservation of life, you're not going to make pregnant women fast. You're not going to make someone who is sick or the elderly, or someone whose life in some way would be harmed by the fasting. So the rules always bend to the preservation of life. If it always comes down to, so they're really, martyrdom, which is so much a part of some branches of Christianity, is not a part of the Jewish tradition. It obviously, one holds to one's principles, but they don't really have a concept of this idea, even willing to accept death than any form of compromise. So anyway, if you have questions about this kind of stuff, you know, leave them in the comments. I haven't said this before, or post them on Blackboard. But anyway, so the idea of mitzvot. So really then, when it comes to the modern Judaism, the attitude towards the Torah and the attitude towards following the laws that derive from the Torah, the mitzvot, are what form the differences among Jewish groups today. So all of it is respected and useful, but whether you believe we've moved beyond that to a new way of being Jewish, or whether we still hold to those 200 rules in some way, shape, or form, or what form the difference. So I'm going to stop here to give you a break, and we're going to come back and look at an analysis of the Ten Commandments, just a brief little conversation about the Ten Commandments in the Jewish context.